What this paper proposes is a number of suggestions as to where we should prioritise the limited resources that we do have. After the election, there's going to be a national security strategy and a strategic defence and security review, no matter who forms a government. Both the major parties are committed to that. And this is an attempt to suggest some ideas about what the strategic underpinnings of that review should be. And the starting point is really to remind us of what the basic principles of our foreign defence policy have been actually since NATO was founded in 1949. Some of the basics haven't changed, and fundamental to that is we've got an internationalist grand strategy. We don't try to achieve our defence and security objectives in the wider world by ourselves in the way that we did before World War II. We do it with our allies, most of all the United States, and our allies in Western Europe, and that's one of the greatest sources of strength. There is, I think, an issue about whether we've got the balance right between dealing with those things which only the UK can deal with, like terrorist or cyber threats to the UK homeland itself, on the one hand, and contributing to international order on the other. And I think both are important, but there may be a case for some rebalancing there. I think it's also important to learn from the lessons of the interventions of the last decade in particular. Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya, not great strategic successes, any of them. And one of the lessons I would suggest from that is that we need to think of our military as being most of all a force for international order, rather than a force that can achieve political change. I think in some of those interventions, we, with our allies, so we weren't by ourselves in this respect, we were too optimistic about the potential for changing the nature of foreign societies through military-led operations. And I think that has to be recalibrated, and we have to focus more on supporting local processes, sometimes of political change, more often of conflict resolution in deeply conflict-riven regions. In the Middle East, for example, I think we're now moving to a phase whereby the focus is trying to find ways of getting societies deeply riven by sectarian and other divides into a place where there can be conflict resolution. Sometimes that does involve external forces supporting one faction or another, sometimes supporting a government against subversion. But most of all, it requires a commitment to bringing people together, bringing key political factions together and supporting resolution, rather than, I think, what was the case immediately after the 9/11 attacks in the United States, where we too easily identified some people as the bad guys and some people as the forces of light, and if only the latter won, then everything would be hunky-dory. And of course that wasn't the case in any of the conflicts in which we got engaged. In some, the purpose of the paper is, on one level, it's simply to say, look, the assumptions on which we've based our security and defence policy since the 1940s remain very valid and point actually to quite clear directions in terms of defence priorities. But it also means that we have to take into account what's happened in the last decade, how the world has changed, and also how our military forces have in some cases been very successful in strategic terms, but in other cases not, and amend what we do in the Strategic Defence and Security Review accordingly.